Fall is in the air and playoff baseball is around the corner. And Team Toyota has everything you need from the tailgate to the trip home, like a great selection of new Toyota trucks and SUVs to choose from, or a lineup with over 200 certified used Toyotas. Plus, our service and collision centers are here to get you back in the game in no time. Visit one of our 3 locations in Princeton, Langhorne, or Glen Mills, or online at teamtoyota.net. Hey everybody, thank you for listening or watching the Phillies Talk Podcast, presented by Team Toyota. I'm Corey Seidman, and I just got back from Citizens Bank Park from the Phillies NL East clincher, the big win that everybody was waiting for, 6-2 on Monday night over the Cubs to finally wrap up the division after the Phillies were unable to pull it out both Saturday and Sunday nights at Citi Field. So, lo and behold, it only took 2 extra nights. Not the worst thing in the world. It enabled the Phillies to celebrate in front of their home fans. Another sellout crowd on Monday at 42,386, and they sound like they are 100% ready for October. These crowds, the last few homestands have been the type that are loud from a half hour before the game, an hour before the game until the final pitch, letting the other team know on every pitch and supporting the Phillies every step of the way. And I thought it was interesting, some of the comments made by different guys in the clubhouse. Like one of the comments that stuck out was Carlos Estevez, who's new to this. He hasn't really experienced Red October before. He hasn't experienced October really in any form. He's been in the playoffs one time, Estevez, back in 2017 when he faced 2 batters with the Rockies. But his comment after the game was that it was an incredible atmosphere, that he wants to feel that every time he goes out from now on. He did say, baseball, the way that the game dictates itself, you're not going to have that opportunity every time, but he got a taste of it. He wants more. Aaron Nola, fitting that Aaron Nola was on the mound to finish off this NL East quest the Phillies had. Nola, time and again the last 3 seasons, has stepped up for the Phillies when they're on the brink of advancing to another round or clinching something. This start from Nola on Monday night was the 7th that he's made since 2022 that could either clinch a playoff spot for the Phillies, send them to the next round, or clinch a division. And in those 7 starts, Nola has gone 4-1 with a 1.62 ERA. The guy's also made some really strong playoff starts, not in those spots. So anybody who has this notion that Aaron Nola is not a big game pitcher, don't know what they've really been watching the last handful of years. And Nola, he was kind of reflective on Monday night, saying that he doesn't take any of this for granted because he came up in 2015 when this was like a distant thought. The Phillies were not winning back then. They were not even on the brink of putting together a contender, but piece by piece, they incrementally pushed this thing forward. 2022 surprised everybody by making that deep playoff run, then continue to add pieces, add finishing pieces. And, another thing that everybody in that clubhouse says is that these guys just continue to get closer and closer. I mean, you see it play out. These guys are all growing together. You have young players growing together like the Stotts and Marshes and Bohms of the world. You have veterans entering their primes and going through their primes together, like the Bryce Harpers and Trey Turners. You have a lot of guys who are settled as family men. It's just a lot of players in the exact right point of their careers, which has enabled this to happen for the Phillies over the last 3 seasons, make these 3 really deep runs. So now the Phillies have a couple other things to play for. They have the bye, which is important to them. They want to secure that bye, and they're on the brink of that as well. The magic number as they enter play on Tuesday will be 2 for the Phillies to get that first round bye. They can secure it as early as Tuesday if they win and if the Brewers lose. But beyond that, Rob Thomson did say on Monday that he's not going to put anybody at risk and go all out for home field advantage, that the bye does mean something, but that he's not going to, reading between the lines of what he said, you might see on Saturday in DC, for example, Zach Wheeler exit his start a little earlier than usual if the Phillies don't have a ton to play for. Like if the Dodgers are still a game up for home field advantage or 2 games up for home field advantage, the Phillies are going to protect themselves. They're going to do what they need to do to get to the NLDS healthy. But they also have to, factor in that there's going to be a long layoff. They have guys like Wheeler and Nola who are going to go a week without pitching. So that's why you want them to make that final start in game 161, 162. You don't want to just rest them, because then it would be too much time off. It would be 2 full weeks, and the risk of rust setting in. But that's kind of a concern for later in the week. The immediate future, the Phillies just want to keep winning here. I mean, they celebrated on Monday night, and they made sure to bask in it, because it's hard to do this. It's hard to go 6 months through a season and grind it out and avoid long slumps, and put a halt to losing streaks, and to keep the big picture in mind while also maintaining that day-to-day perspective, not to get too far ahead of yourself, to stay healthy, to avoid distractions. Look at the situation the Nationals just dealt with over the weekend with C.J. Abrams, their star shortstop, where he was caught out at 8 a.m. at a casino before a 1 p.m. game. I mean, that's a very uncommon occurrence, but the Phillies don't have those sorts of distractions. I mean, they have a bunch of guys who are in it to win it. They're here for the right reasons, and they've a lot of guys who have made their money, a lot of guys who are over themselves, and a lot of guys who just want to, put that icing on the cake, cap off their careers with that World Series ring that's going to immortalize them here in this town if they're able to achieve it. Because there's only one way that the story ends happily for Phillies fans and for those players, and that's if they win the World Series. I mean, it doesn't matter if they get to Game 7 of the World Series and play their asses off and lose a nail biter. That's still going to be a huge disappointment, because this team is built to win the World Series. And as you stack these rosters up against each other, they still have one of the most dangerous teams in October. I mean, I say one of the most dangerous teams. They still have the deepest roster. When you factor in starting pitching, offense, bullpen, defense, this is still the strongest roster. The Dodgers have that scary top of the order with Ohtani and Betts and Freeman and Will Smith and Muncy, but they're running on fumes in the pitching staff, and they don't really have proven back end guys in the bullpen. So not to say that the Dodgers are weak, but they're susceptible. Every one of these teams in the National League playoff field is susceptible. I put out a poll on Twitter on, I sit down to record this on Monday night, so I guess this was probably Thursday or Friday, asking Phillies fans who they would want to face in the NLDS. And the results were pretty much even, and the responses were pretty much mixed. I mean, you had people saying that it would be idiotic to want to face the Padres. You had people saying it would be idiotic to want to face the Mets. You had people saying it would be idiotic to want to face the Diamondbacks. Really, a case can be made that any of those three potential opponents is the strongest of the bunch or the weakest of the bunch. But, a stat that I've been writing and trotting out there over the last couple of weeks is that the Phillies are 25-14 this season against the other 5 teams in the NL playoff field. They're 25-14. None of the other NL teams is better than 20-20, better than 500 against the rest of the field. So, I mean, that is a separator. A lot of those games did come in the first half, but the Phillies have shown all season long they've been able to play up to the level of competition. And that's why this past week, the road trip through Milwaukee and New York was, a bit troubling, because those are exactly the types of teams you're going to face in October. You're going to face really good pitching staffs, teams that aren't afraid to go to the bullpen and match up, teams that have a bunch of guys coming out of there with, 4 pitches and 98-mile-per-hour fastballs. It's going to be low-scoring games. And the Phillies came up short. They went 2-5 in Milwaukee and New York. That was why they were unable to clinch on the road. If they went 3-4, had just a losing week, but went 3-4, they would have clinched. But couldn't pick up the big hit more often than not on the road. And one of the things that stuck out during that trip was just the number of strikeouts. I mean, the Phillies struck out 16 times on back-to-back nights in Milwaukee. There was an at-bat Sunday night in New York where JT Realmuto really extended the strike zone twice, chased a pitch well outside, and then struck himself out on ball 5. Realmuto bounced back in a big way on Monday night. He had cracked a 2-run homer to center in his first at-bat to put the Phillies ahead, and they really, never looked back in any form from there. It was a comfortable, smooth win for the Phillies, finishing off the Cubs using those early homers by JT Realmuto and Kyle Schwarber. But, some of that chasing was because the Phillies were facing really good pitchers, but some of that chasing was because, again, guys were trying to hit the homer. Instead of getting on base with a single or a walk and passing the baton, a lot of times this season, that's when the Phillies have been at their absolute best, is when they're passing the baton. that's been when they put together like their most inspiring comebacks and the rallies. Like you think of like that Buddy Kennedy, Cody Clemens game where one guy works a walk, the next guy hits a single. It's not someone looking to hit that bases clearing double. But all teams are home run reliant. It's not just the Phillies. It's all teams. That's why it's important to have games that you're able to eke out these nail biters. I mean, Johan Rojas laid down 2 sacrifice bunts on Monday night. There's a lot of things people are going to remember about that night, and I guarantee you that's not one of them, but that's something that could be important in the month of October when Rojas does come up. Celebrity cook Steve Martirano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martirano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations for Martirano's Prime on OpenTable. Now, Monday night, obviously, there was what we saw on the field and the fact that the Phillies were able to finally finish the job and all the storylines with the players. But it was also another one of these crazy scenes in the clubhouse that we've become accustomed to seeing over the last few years as media members, and all the fans out there. You guys get to see it as well because the Phillies just love doing their thing in front of the cameras. And Spencer McKercher, our trusty producer, was right in the middle of it as always. Got some great footage. Brandon Marsh, Garrett Stubbs, all the classic party animals. Spence, what jumped out to you from the clubhouse Monday night?
Dude, a lot of things, right? It was your typical, it's year 3 now. Here we are. Just your typical craziness, right? It was awesome, man. It was such a good time. I think the best part of the entire night was our good buddy Tom McCarthy talking to Garrett Stubbs after the game. Asking Garrett Stubbs how many overalls, he has those Spoko overalls. He's like, how many of these do you have? And Garrett was confused and thought it was beers. So,
of course he did.
Of course he did. He's like, I got like 6 here, right? And I got 4 in the back. Meanwhile, he's asking about the overalls. So, yeah, man, just another chaotic scene. And our good buddy John Clark, I was with him the whole night, and a lot of good content that came out of it. It was a lot of fun, man. And another fantastic, I'm telling you, that pool of beer, champagne, everything was the deepest I've seen it. Last year, I thought it was pretty deep, but like the fact that it was almost up to my ankles, like my shoes were fully drenched in alcohol and whatever else was going on. And then they kept bringing the what's like the smoke machine, basically. I lost John at one point, dude. Completely.
I'll tell you, it's easy to lose somebody in that clubhouse. Aaron Nola is behind the smoke machine. He's the one who the last few years has bought the different smoke machines. And this one is just that they've got this year is like ridiculous. The level of smoke that's in that clubhouse. Like you really feel like you're walking through that Stephen King movie, The Mist. You can't see anything in front of you. There was one night, like midway through the season, where Zach Wheeler was doing met with us after a start in the middle of the clubhouse, and he was even laughing about it. But those guys, they like to celebrate. And there was like a school of thought leading into this of, should they celebrate? I mean, they've been here before. They should act like they've been there before. The goal is higher. But as I was just saying earlier, it is so hard to do this, to get through 6 months of a season. You have to like avoid so many of the pitfalls and so many of the bad luck factors that limit a team or hinder a team throughout a season. There are some really good teams. I wrote this on Monday night, but it's hard to remember at this point, but 5 months ago, the Braves and Dodgers were projected to win 10 more games than the Phillies. The Phillies are on their level. They've proven all year that they're on those teams' level, if not better. But that wasn't a thought 5 months ago. They weren't supposed to win the division. So, yeah, you celebrate this. I mean, this hasn't happened since 2011. And there's some guys in that clubhouse, they might not win another division the rest of their careers.
Correct. And, I think even just seeing NL East champions on the scoreboard afterwards and stuff, it was kind of a very surreal moment in terms of, they actually did it. And some of the post-game sound, I think my favorite soundbite that we got when I was with John Clark was Jeff Hoffman talking about, he said that basically every night in the offseason, every single night, he would go to bed dreaming about this moment, winning the division, getting back to Red October. And to see him and the Phillies complete that was incredible. And just the fact that they did it on their home, obviously, I'm sure you talked about it and all that stuff, but not being able to do it in New York, and we were all there, is one thing. But to do it in front of the home crowd, another sellout, another year or another day of a sellout crowd, and to come through the way they did, it was astonishing, man. And I felt good. It felt good to have the champagne smile. I mean, dude, I reek right now. I can't wait to shower. There's been a lot of work put in, and shout out to our social team and everybody else. But yeah, man, some of those comments afterwards, just talking about how much Red October means to these guys, is astonishing, and it's incredible. All the work that they put in, and to finally come out with a division title after 11 years, and the Braves winning the last 6 years, to come out with that is pretty special.
And really, it's like no harm, no foul. I mean, yeah, they had to wait 2 extra nights. It's not that big of a deal. They still clinched the division. They still have a lot of time to spare here. They'll still have time to get guys off their feet if they want to. As I was saying earlier, I thought it was interesting that Rob Thompson pregame on Monday reiterated that the bye is important to the Phillies. They want to play toward that bye, but that they're not going to put guys in harm's way in order to get home field advantage. So, securing at least the 2 seed is a big deal. But if the Dodgers are 2 games ahead on Saturday, I don't think the Phillies are still going to have Wheeler and Nola go 7 innings apiece. They might pull them back a little bit because the other part of home field advantage is we've talked about it so much throughout this month of September, but it only is going to matter if the Dodgers also make it to the NLCS. And they might not. I mean, the Dodgers have no pitching left right now. And yeah, they have a fearsome offense. I was watching that game on Sunday against the Rockies, just waiting for the inevitable for Ohtani and Betts to bring them back as they did in the 9th. But, if the Phillies face any of these other teams in the NLCS, they will have home field advantage. They also have home field advantage over all these American League teams because they have a better record than them. And, Citizens Bank Park is a real advantage. It's a real advantage every time the Phillies come back home from the road. And, the games are just different there. They're able to get out to these early leads, and the crowd's able to bring them through. Like the Cubs stood no chance on Monday night. After that Kyle Schwarber homer made it 3-0. It's just like from that point on, it's like, all right, the Cubs are ready to go golf. And it looked like the classic contender versus a team that's ready for the season to end.
For sure. And I especially after the when it made it 5-0, when the catcher threw down to second, Bryce ends up scoring from second. He tried to pick Bryce off from second, and it was almost like, ooh, and you could kind of see, some of the writers there that was like, oh boy, here we go. Yeah, man, it was one of those almost guaranteed wins. And like we said, just being a part of being up in New York, it'd been great to clinch a division in front of those fans. That place was ruckus all weekend. Being up there, Citi Field was great, but yeah, the dude in front of your home crowd, and the poor Cubs, man, like it was. I also booked it for Sunday. I thought Wheeler on the mound, I thought he could have kind of locked up the Cy Young with a great performance, and full credit to Zach. He was fantastic on Sunday night. But yeah, just the dude in front of these home crowd, in front of everybody against the Cubs. It was awesome, man. And I'm super happy for everybody. And it was crazy. We were kind of talking about it. I was talking to some of the guys about it post game. We ended up going to Xfinity. All the guys went there. Just kind of snuck in and started talking to some of the guys. And they're ready. It's not World Series or bust, but it pretty much is. And John Middleton said that tonight, basically just being like, there is next year, but like this is the year to do it.
Yeah, it's World Series or bust.
Yeah, sure. I like it has to be, right? Like it's the third time's a charm. And I know everyone was kind of freaking out because the offense has gone cold over the last 4 or 5 days, going 2-5 on that road trip. But once they get back home, it's a completely different team. And you saw that on Monday night with, like you said, as soon as it went up 3-0 when Schwarber hit that home run, you kind of felt good about that they were going to win the division.
Well, the reason that it has to be this year, I'm not saying that if it doesn't happen this year, it's never going to happen. But like the reason it really has to be this year is because how many more years are you going to get 190 healthy innings out of Nola and Wheeler and get them to the finish line, still throwing heat and still having like Christmas to their secondary pitches? How many years in a row are you going to have Bryce Harper playing at an MVP level and Kyle Schwarber getting 40 bombs, and JT Realmuto being a good all-around catcher and having a bullpen as strong as this back end? Like, it really has to come together this year, because if it doesn't, then you're going to start to have the conversation about the window. You're going to have that dreaded window conversation. This is the window. It's right now for the Phillies. They have the deepest roster in baseball. When they're playing well, they look like they look like as scary a team as anybody else,
Sure.
And I just like it would be a massive disappointment if anything else happens. Like I was saying earlier, if they get to Game 7 of the World Series and lose a nail biter and play competitively, that's still going to be a huge disappointment. Like there's only one way this story ends with a happy ending, and it's if the Phillies finish the job. And that's like the perspective that they're all keeping in there. Like this was important. It was an important step along the way because this conversation began in spring training. It began the first day guys showed up, like that they wanted the bye. That's something they prioritized. They've had enough of hearing the Braves talk about how the bye is a negative. Actually, that brings me to another question. You talking about being up there in that Mets series. You were up there. Brooke Destra was up there covering the series for us from a written perspective. But from my vantage point, I know Phillies fans like to beat up on the Mets and make fun of the Mets. That is a dangerous team. They've played very well. Yeah, they played very well since the All-Star break, and they just feel confident against the Phillies. The way that like the Phillies have the Padres number, it's not like that when the Phillies face the Mets. Like those are always close games, and division games, as we've seen with the Phillies and Braves the last two NLDS, they can be a crapshoot come October. Really, anything can happen.
Well, and like Saturday and Sunday being up there, I had the same exact vibe from the NLCS last year against the Diamondbacks and the same exact vibe against the Astros in the World Series in 2022. It was just like the offense just completely went cold. It was one of those where it's like, okay, the Mets are going to come through at some point. Nimmo ends up coming through for the Mets in the 6th inning on Sunday. It was a very similar vibe that it was just kind of like, all right, well, what is this offense going to do? And just being up there, dude, and that crowd, I'm telling you, man, was ruckus. It was a good crowd, and they had, I think it was 160,000 people over the 4 games, which was like the most ever in Citi Field over a 4-game series. They're ready, and even talking to some of the staff members up there, they're feeling confident, right? And Francisco Alvarez is getting hot again, even without Lindor. I was talking, like I said, talking to some of those guys up there, and they were kind of saying along the lines of, even without Lindor, they're very confident right now. And that scares me. And I saw some tweets that were kind of talking about, like if the Mets and the Phillies played, who would you pick right now? And it scared me, the amount of votes that were for the Mets. But it comes down to home field advantage. It comes down to being at CBP, feeling comfortable. And I think playing the Cubs right now and playing the Nationals compared to the Mets, who have the Braves this week and then the Brewers this weekend, these are kind of like, okay, let's get right games, right? This is kind of let's figure out our stuff. Let's get hot again, and we can keep rolling into October.
Yeah, that's the other thing, too, is that if the Phillies don't end up with the 1 seed, if the Dodgers end up with the 1 seed, like if the season ended today, that 1 seed would face in the NLDS, they would face that 4-5. So that would be, as of today, that would be Padres or Mets, who are much hotter than the Brewers and Diamondbacks. Like not to take anything away from the Brewers and Diamondbacks, but you might be better off getting a 2 seed. Who knows? This is a whole fascinating way that this is playing out. But I will say that I think it probably benefits the Phillies that they still have something to play for here, because the Braves, each of the last 2 seasons, the Braves last season were 15 games up in September. The year before, the division wasn't really up for grabs. The division was up for grabs, but both teams knew they'd be in the playoffs. The Phillies have had to play all the way through September to clinch the division and have to play this final week to get a bye. They don't have 2 weeks to feel themselves and to let that rust set. And I think that could, end up playing a factor, because the Braves really didn't have anything to play for the entire month of September.
Correct. And we talked to Rob Thompson. We asked everybody, Jeff Hoffman, Brandon Marsh, Nick Castellanos, Aaron Nola, Bryce Harper, post-game tonight after the win. And it was kind of like, what's the difference where you were the hunter compared to the hunted, right? And they both were kind of like, everyone said it's a little different, right? But the objective is still the same, no matter what. They're going to come out here. There's not really a big difference in terms of what they do as a team, comparative. But and my question today, especially to some of the guys, was kind of like, all right, well, do you feel comfortable if they end up getting to the NLCS? Say you don't get home field, the Dodgers have the 1 seed and they make it to the NLCS just as well as the Phillies, and you don't have home field. I personally feel comfortable with the Phillies going to LA and winning 1 of 2, and then coming back here where you have 3 straight games at home and maybe seeing where it goes. It's very similar to the NLCS in 2022.
Of course.
Right. But I don't know. My confidence is there for the Dodgers, but it's getting past.
Well, I mean, we saw the Diamondbacks do it last year, right? I mean, they didn't even win games 1 and 2, but they still came back in that series. I do think the Phillies would be capable of doing it. To me, the home field advantage with the series against the Dodgers is more about making 2 West Coast trips in the span of a week versus making 1 West Coast trip in the span of a week after you've just spent an entire season traveling and playing all these games. Yeah, the Phillies will be well rested and they're professionals and they are used to all that, but every little advantage counts that time of year. And that's going to wrap up this Phillies Talk podcast. It has been a late night and a long weekend. And Spence, you need some sleep, man. You need to get some sleep ahead of Tuesday.
And here's the thing. They won the division. Let's all hang out for a little bit and hopefully rest up. And we got a big October on the way. But like you said, man, like these are huge games coming up. You can't. Now, I will say tomorrow on Tuesday, the lineup's going to look a little different.
Yeah, but there's still a little bit to play for here.
Exactly,
Tanner Banks is getting a start. He's going to be the opener in a bullpen game for the Phillies. Oh, yeah. The final time that number 5 spot comes up, and then we never have to talk about it again for the rest of our lives. No, not until next March at least. So that'll do it for this Phillies Talk podcast. He is Spencer. I'm Corey. Thanks a lot for listening and watching us. We'll catch you later in the week.